Alright, so you want to hear about the dark side of Tamriel? The groups that got so dangerous, so twisted, that entire empires had to step in and say, yeah, no more of that? We're talking about the banned cults of the Elder Scrolls. And trust me, this rabbit hole goes deep. We're talking necromancy, vampire assassins, disease-spreading god monsters, and plots to literally end the world. Also, a shout out to Derico, aka Hopeless Noob, for the gameplay today. If you also want to help out and send in some gameplay, you can use the form in the description. Let's kick things off with probably the most infamous banned cult in all of Tamriel, the Mythic Dawn. These guys were responsible for one of the biggest disasters in Imperial history, the Oblivion Crisis. Yeah, those red portal things that nearly destroyed Cyrodiil, that was them. The Mythic Dawn was led by this Altmer named Mankar Camoran. Now, Mankar's backstory is wild. His father was Haemon Camoran, the Camoran usurper, who terrorized Tamriel back in the Third Era. According to the book The Refugees, Mankar was born during the final battle against the usurper in the year 3 E276. His mother, a Bosmer woman named Kalis, gave birth to him during the siege of Dwynn and then just vanished into the wilderness with baby Mankar. What happened during those years is a complete mystery. When Mankar resurfaces in history, he's got this book called the Mysterium xarxes. This thing is basically the most evil book in existence. It was written by Mehrunes Dagon himself, the Daedric Prince of Destruction. Now, how exactly Mankar got his hands on this is unclear, but it changed everything. He pored over the Mysterium xarxes and wrote his own series of books called the Commentaries on the Mysterium xarxes. These 4 volumes became the foundational texts of the Mythic Dawn cult. Here's where it gets interesting with the commentaries. The books were written sometime during Tiber Septim's reign, which means around 3E33. That's 400 years before the Oblivion Crisis actually happened. So Mankar was playing the long game here, like really long. The commentaries, spread throughout Cyrodiil, passed from hand to hand in secret. Most people thought they were just obscure philosophical texts. The first 2 volumes were rare but obtainable. The 3rd volume required special orders through certain booksellers who were in the know. The 4th volume, you could only get that directly from a member of the cult who deemed you worthy. They called these people sponsors. But here's the really clever part. The commentaries had a hidden message encoded within them. If you took the first letter of each paragraph and decoded it properly, it gave you the location of the cult's main sanctuary, the Lake Arius Cavern. So the recruitment process was basically a test. If you're smart enough to figure out the puzzle, you're smart enough to join. Pretty exclusive. The cult's beliefs were absolutely bonkers from a theological standpoint. Mankar claimed that Nirn, the mortal world, wasn't actually the creation of the Aedra like everyone believed. Instead, he said it was actually an oblivion plane that rightfully belonged to Mehrunes Dagon. According to Mankar, the Aedra were traitors who stole the realm from Lorkhan, who was actually a Daedric prince. I know, this contradicts basically everything established in Elder Scrolls lore, but that's cult logic for you. The ultimate goal was to destroy the Septim bloodline and let the barriers between Nirn and Oblivion collapse. Once Dagon could physically manifest on Nirn, he would liberate everyone from the tyranny of the Aedra. Mankar called the Septim Emperors and their followers Dragon's Blood, enemies of their cause. Mankar himself had 2 children, Raven and Ruma Camoran. Both were devoted members of the cult and served as his lieutenants. Using the power of the Mysterium xarxes, Mankar created his own pocket realm of oblivion called Gyre Alata, or Paradise. This is where dead Mythic Dawn members would supposedly go to be rewarded for their service. Except Paradise was actually a nightmare. Yeah, it looked beautiful at first glance, but cult members who died were stuck in an endless cycle. Daedra would attack them, kill them, they'd resurrect, and it would happen all over again. Forever. The only way out was through a place called the Forbidden Grotto. But to get there, you needed the bands of the chosen, which only the most trusted members received. And even then, the grotto was just a torture chamber. So basically, Mankar was lying to his followers about the afterlife they'd receive. Typical cult leader move. The actual assassination plot went down in 3E433. The mythic Dawn had infiltrated the highest levels of imperial security. They killed Emperor Uriel Septim, the Seventh's three legitimate heirs first, Princes Geldal, Enman, and Ebel Septim. Then they went after the Emperor himself. Uriel tried to escape through a secret passage in the imperial prison, but Mankar had predicted this. One of his lieutenants, an Altmer named Eldamil, had positioned assassins inside the escape route. They murdered the Emperor right there in the tunnels. But here's where their plan started falling apart. There was one more heir, an illegitimate son named Martin Septim. Martin was a priest living in Kuwach, staying under the radar. The mythic Dawn attacked Kuwach, trying to kill him, but Martin survived thanks to a prisoner from the imperial dungeons, the hero of Kuwach. This hero also managed to grab the Amulet of Kings before the mythic Dawn could secure it, though they eventually stole it from Waynon Priory. With the amulet in hand, Mankar retreated to his paradise to wait for Dagon's arrival. The hero of Kuwach had to fight through an army of mythic Dawn cultists at Lake Arias Cavern, recovered the mysterium xarxes, and then use it to open a portal to paradise. Inside paradise, they found Mankar in his palace, Karak Agayalor. The confrontation there is pretty memorable. Mankar genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. He saw himself as a liberator, not a destroyer. But the hero killed him anyway, which caused paradise to collapse and freed all the trapped souls. The final battle happened at the Imperial City when Dagon himself manifested physically. Martin Septim shattered the Amulet of Kings and transformed into an avatar of Akatosh to fight Dagon directly. Dagon was banished back to oblivion, the barriers were permanently sealed, and the mythic Dawn was finished as an organization. Most of the cultists were killed either during the crisis or hunted down afterward, but the story doesn't completely end there. In Skyrim, during the Fourth Era, a museum curator named Silas Vesuvius opened up a museum dedicated to the mythic Dawn in Dawnstar. Silas's own ancestors had been cultists. He sends the last Dragonborn on a quest to recover pieces of Mehrunes' razor, Dagon's artifact weapon, from the descendants of the people who guarded it after the Oblivion crisis. And in the Creation Club content, The Cause, we learned that a new group of mythic Dawn cultists tried to restart the whole thing. A priest named Vonos found an old mythic Dawn gathering place in Red Scar Cavern in the Velothi Mountains. He claimed to receive dreams from Dagon, telling him to dig deeper and deeper. He found a buried Oblivion gate and spent months excavating it stone by stone. Other cultists started showing up, drawn by their own dreams. They tried to reopen the gate and start another invasion, but the Dragonborn and the vigilance of Stendarr shut them down. Now, let's talk theories. The big question that historians and scholars in Tamriel still debate is, how much of Mankar's theology was real? Did Dagon actually tell him that Nirn was an Oblivion plane, or did Mankar just make that up? The Daedric Prince Lyranth, who's pretty knowledgeable about these things, flat out called the mythic Dawn's beliefs stupid. She said the idea that Mundus is part of Oblivion is false, and the claim that it belongs to Dagon is just convenient propaganda. But here's the weird thing. Mankar managed to wear the Amulet of Kings. That should be impossible for anyone without dragon blood. Some people think he used the mysterium xarxes to literally change his own nature, transforming himself from an Altmer into someone with the blood of the dragonborn emperors. Others think the amulet was just dormant and would accept anyone when the dragon fires weren't lit. We don't know for sure. Another question is whether Mankar originally came up with these ideas himself or if Dagon fed them to him. The Mysterium xarxes is known to corrupt anyone who reads it. Maybe Mankar was a genuine believer who got manipulated by a Daedric prince's propaganda. Or maybe he was always power-hungry and just found a convenient patron. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Next up, we've got the Order of the Black Worm, also called the Worm Cult. This is Manimarco's organization, and it's all about necromancy. Manimarco, for those who don't know, is called the King of Worms, and he's one of the most powerful necromancers in all of Tamriel's history. Fun fact, he eventually becomes a god and turns into the necromancer's moon. Yeah, he's that powerful. Manimarco started out as a student at the Sigic Order on the Isle of Artaeum, along with Vanus Gallerion, who would later found the Mages Guild. The two of them were both incredibly talented, but they disagreed on everything. Vanus wanted to use magic to help people and promote order. Manimarco was interested in necromancy and the manipulation of souls. Eventually, the Sigic Order kicked Manimarco out for dabbling in forbidden arts. This is around the time that Vanus left to form the Mages Guild, and Manimarco went off to form his own rival organization. The Order of the Black Worm was structured in cells called worm nests, each led by a worm anchorite who reported directly to Manimarco. Below them were necromancer adepts, worm warriors, and thralls. The organization recruited by promising power. Join us, serve Manimarco, and you learn the secrets of manipulating death itself. All members were marked with black pentagram brands as a symbol of their damnation. In most places across Tamriel, necromancy was illegal, or at least heavily restricted. The order operated in secret, bribing officials and intimidating authorities to look the other way. But here's the crazy part. During the Second Era, specifically during the Planemelt crisis, Manimarco actually managed to get necromancy legalized in Cyrodiil. The Tharn family, who were ruling from the imperial city at the time, made the Worm Cult the official magical advisors to the throne, replacing the Mages Guild. They even gave them a fancy name, the Fellowship of Anchorites. This happened because Manimarco was working with Molagbal, the Daedric Prince of Domination, to cause the Plane Meld, an attempt to merge Nirn with Molagbal's realm of Cold Harbor. Manimarco tricked the 5 companions into performing a ritual that caused the Soul Burst, which kicked off the whole crisis. During this time, the Worm Cult had free reign to practice necromancy openly in Imperial territory. The cult's activities were pretty horrific. They'd kidnap people to use in experiments, create armies of undead, and harvest souls using devices called animus geodes. They knew how to bind spirits, reanimate corpses, and summon dark anchors from Cold Harbor. Later, after the Plane Meld failed, they started using Soul Reapers, magical engines that could drain the souls from entire populations at once. They tried this at a place called Solstice, attempting to gather enough souls to regain Molagbal's favor after their previous failure. Throughout history, the Worm Cult has been responsible for countless atrocities. They desecrate burial grounds, turning the honored dead into mindless zombies. They'd spread blight and disease. They'd infiltrate towns and villages, setting up hidden laboratories in abandoned buildings and caves. The cult had a particular grudge against followers of Arkai, the god of life and death, since Arkai's priests actively worked against necromancy. The rivalry between Manimarco and Vanus Gallerion never died. In the Second Era, Vanus tracked down Manimarco and challenged him to battle, bringing an army of mages and lamp knights. The Great Battle happened, and while both sides suffered massive casualties, Vanus managed to defeat Manimarco, or so everyone thought. Manimarco's spirit survived, and he eventually reconstituted himself. This becomes a recurring theme. Manimarco is really hard to kill permanently. Fast forward to the Third Era, just before the Oblivion crisis. The Archmage of the Mages Guild, Hannibal Traven, officially banned necromancy from the guild in 3E 431. This was a huge deal. Prior to this, necromancy was frowned upon, but technically allowed. Traven's ban was absolute. Any guild mage practicing necromancy would be expelled immediately. Half the Council of Mages resigned in protest, and scores of other mages left the guild. This weakened the Mages Guild significantly, which was exactly what Manimarco was counting on. See, all those expelled necromancers, they went straight to Manimarco. The Worm Cult grew rapidly. and Manimarco used his new followers to launch a devastating attack on the Mages Guild. The war between the guild and the cult got really bloody. Manimarco even managed to resurrect Vanus Gallerion's corpse and turn him into a thrall, which is about as disrespectful as you can get. Eventually, Archmage Traven's protege, who would become the new Archmage, tracked Manimarco down to his lair in Echo Cave. They fought, and the hero killed Manimarco, seemingly destroying the worm cult in the process. But again, Manimarco is hard to keep down. By the 4th era, necromancers in Hope's Fall Cave were trying to resurrect the order by praying to the necromancer's moon. The most interesting thing about the worm cult is how persistent it is. The organization has been destroyed and reformed multiple times across different eras. Every time you think it's gone, it comes back. Part of this is because necromancy itself is tempting. The promise of power over death attracts people. Part of it is Manimarco himself, who seems to have achieved some form of immortality even before he became the Revenant. There's a theory among scholars that Manimarco's ascension to godhood during the warp in the west actually split him. One version became the necromancer's moon, a god in oblivion. The other version remained mortal and continued operating in Nirn. This would explain how he can be killed in oblivion but still exist afterward. It's a dragon break thing. Both realities are true simultaneously. Another theory is that the worm cult serves multiple purposes for Manimarco. Yes, it's about gaining power and studying necromancy, but it's also about revenge against the establishment that rejected him. The Sijic Order kicked him out. The Mages Guild opposed him. By creating a rival organization and repeatedly attacking the guild, he's making a statement. He's proving that his path was the right one. And then there's the question of Molag Bal. Manimarco's alliance with the Daedric prince during the Planemeld raises questions about his ultimate goals. Did he genuinely want to help Molag Bal merge the planes, or was he just using the prince to gain power? The fact that he eventually tried to betray Molag Bal suggests the latter. Manimarco isn't really loyal to anyone except himself. Let's talk about the 6th house, or as it's also known, House Dagoth. This cult is weird because it's technically both a great house of the Dwemer and a banned cult at the same time. The history here gets complicated, so bear with me. Back in the 1st era, House Dagoth was one of the 6 great houses of the Chimer, led by a guy named Voren Dagoth. He was tied with Induril Nerevar, the legendary warrior who united the Chimer. When the Dwemer discovered the heart of Lorkhan underneath Red Mountain and started using it to build a giant god robot called the Numidium, Voren brought the news to Nerevar. Together, they led the Chimer in the War of the First Council against the Dwemer. After the Dwemer mysteriously vanished during the battle, Nerevar entered Red Mountain with his advisors, the people who would become the Tribunal. They found Voren guarding Kagranak's tools, the magical devices used to tap into the heart's power. What happened next is disputed depending on who's telling the story. According to the Tribunal, Voren went crazy with power and refused to hand over the tools, forcing Nerevar to fight him. According to the Ashlanders, the Tribunal murdered Nerevar and blamed it on Voren. Either way, Voren and his kinsmen were driven deep into Red Mountain and supposedly killed. All records of House Dagoth were destroyed, and its members were either executed or absorbed into other houses. The 6th house ceased to exist, except Voren didn't die. The power of the heart sustained him and transformed him into Dagoth-Ur, a being of immense magical power. His kinsmen also survived, transformed into creatures called ash vampires, not actual vampires, but beings empowered by the heart. For centuries, Dagoth-Ur slept, building his strength. He awakened in the 2nd era, around 2E882, and started rebuilding his house in secret. The 6th house cult operated very differently from traditional Dwemer houses. It recruited through dreams. Dagoth-Ur could project his consciousness into the minds of sleeping Dwemer, especially those with ancestral connections to House Dagoth. These people became known as dreamers or sleepers. while in their trance state, they would receive visions from Dagoth and carry out his commands. Most of them had no memory of this when they woke up. So, you could have a perfectly normal shopkeeper in Balmora who at night would walk to a secret sixth house shrine and perform rituals, then wake up the next morning with no idea what happened. The cult also spread through a disease called corprus, also known as the divine disease. This was Dagoth creation, a magical plague that spread through the ash storms coming from Red Mountain. People infected with corprus underwent horrible transformations. The unworthy ones lost their minds and mutated into mindless monsters, corprus stalkers, and lame corprus. The worthy ones became more powerful but still twisted, ascended sleepers with melted faces and exposed organs, or ash creatures with trunk-like snouts. The cult's main bases were ancient Dunmer strongholds and remote caves across Vardenfell. Places like Kogarun, which was reoccupied by Dagoth Uthol, one of the ash vampires, in 3E 400. These strongholds served as breeding grounds for ash creatures and training centers for cultists. The deeper you went into these places, the more reality started breaking down. You'd hear Dagoth voice whispering to you. The walls would pulse. Everything became dreamlike and nightmarish. Dagoth ultimate plan involved building his own version of the Numidium, called Akulakhan, or the Second Numidium. This giant construct would be powered by the heart of Lorkhan and would serve multiple purposes. First, it would act as the military champion of the Sixth House, conquering Morrowind and then the rest of Tamriel. Second, it would spread Dagoth divine power across the land, transforming everyone into members of his new perfect world. Third, it would be a symbol that would unite all Dunmer under his banner while destroying the false gods of the tribunal. The ideology of the Sixth House was a mix of ancient Chimer traditions and Dagoth own warped vision. He claimed to be the true heir of Nerevar's legacy. He wanted to drive out the Empire and all foreigners from Morrowind. He wanted to destroy the Tribunal's religious and political power, since he saw them as traitors who murdered Nerevar and stole godhood that wasn't rightfully theirs. He wanted to reclaim ancient Dunmer territories from Skyrim and Ergonia, and ultimately he wanted to spread worship of Akulakhan across all of Tamriel through conquest. The cult had several ways of influencing people. The Dreamers, as mentioned, operated as sleeper agents. The cult also assassinated political enemies, targeting both Imperial sympathizers and Tribunal loyalists. They raided settlements to steal supplies and spread fear. They infiltrated smuggling operations to expand their reach, and they sent out ash creatures to attack travelers and guard their strongholds. Music played a weird role in the cult's practices. All their shrines had large bells or chimes that were used in rituals. This might connect to the dwemer's tonal architecture, the method Kagernak used to manipulate the heart. Some Sixth House creatures had trunk-like snouts that could be used as musical instruments. There's even a novel called Poison Song that talks about how descendants of House Dagoth could hear the house's song. The Tribunal tried repeatedly to assault Red Mountain and regain control of the Heart Chamber. Every year, they would attempt their ritual to draw power from the heart to maintain their godhood. But in 3E 417, Dagoth and his forces ambushed them and drove them out. After that, the Tribunal never regained their full power. They had to create the Ghost Fence, a magical barrier, to contain the blight and prevent Dagoth forces from spreading across Morrowind. In 3E 426 and 427, the Sixth House's activity spiked dramatically. They started assassinating high-profile targets, including Imperial citizens. This might have been what prompted Emperor Uriel Septim VII to send the nerevarine to investigate. The actual nerevarine showed up, recovered Kagranak's tools, fought through the ash vampires, and confronted Dagoth in the Heart Chamber. The final confrontation is interesting because Dagoth doesn't immediately attack. He talks to the nerevarine, explains his goals, and even shows a degree of honor by letting the nerevarine strike first. He genuinely believes he's doing the right thing. When asked how he justifies all the murder and suffering, he says he accepts the responsibility of leadership and that Morrowind can't be liberated without bloodshed. He sees himself as a noble revolutionary, not a monster. After the nerevarine destroys the heart of Lorkhan using Sunder and Keening, Dagoth and all the ash vampires die. The corpus disease stops spreading, and the dreamers wake up with no memory of what they did. The sixth house ceases to exist, and House Dagoth remains stricken from history. But here's where it gets theoretical. There are a lot of unanswered questions about House Dagoth. First, what exactly was Vorin's relationship with the Dwemer? House Dagoth was the only great house with close ties to the Dwemer before the war. Archaeological digs have found Dagoth clan markings in Dwemer ruins, suggesting the two cultures mingled. Did Vorin learn something about the heart from them? Second, did Vorin actually betray Nerevar, or was he the loyal one? The Ashlander version of events says the tribunal killed Nerevar. There's even hidden code in Vivek's writings that some interpret as a confession. If this is true, then Vorin's actions in the Heart Chamber weren't about greed, but about protecting Nerevar's wishes. The tribunal then had to eliminate him and destroy all records of House Dagoth to cover up their crime. Third, was Dagoth insane, or was he the sanest person in the room? From his perspective, he's the only one trying to honor Nerevar's true legacy. The tribunal broke their oath and became false gods. The Empire invaded and colonized Morrowind. The traditional Dunmer way of life is being eroded. He sees himself as a revolutionary fighting against tyranny. The fact that his methods involved grotesque body horror and mind control is, to him, a necessary evil. Is that insanity, or just a different moral framework? Fourth, there's the novel Poison Song, which mentions an heir of Dagoth named Dagoth Tython, who appeared shortly after the Battle of Red Mountain. He and Dagoth Akra led survivors of the sixth house in attacks against the other houses before being hunted down. The novel suggests Dagoth Akra was pregnant when she disappeared. Did House Dagoth survivors exist in hiding for all those centuries? Could there be descendants still out there? Finally, what was the true nature of Dagoth connection to the dream? He's sometimes called the Sharmat by Vivek, which relates to dream sleeve inversion. He's associated with a group called the Biters. Some esoteric texts suggest his method of achieving godhood was through manipulating the way dreams and reality work. This connects to deeper Elder Scrolls metaphysics about the dream of the Godhead and Kim. Did Dagoth achieve some form of enlightenment, or did he just go mad? Speaking of Nerevar, let's talk about the Nerevarine cult. This one's interesting because it was banned even though its core belief that Nerevar would be reborn turned out to be true. The cult emerged from traditional Ashlander ancestor worship. The Ashlanders are the nomadic Dunmer who never accepted the tribunal's rule and maintained the old ways. To them, Nerevar was the greatest of their ancestors, and they kept his memory alive through oral tradition. The Nerevarine cult specifically believed that Nerevar would return one day to cast down the false tribunal and drive the Outlanders, particularly the Imperials, from Morrowind. The cult was most strongly connected to the Urshilaku tribe, though members existed across all the Ashlander tribes. They studied the Nerevarine prophecies, a complex set of predictions about how the incarnate would be recognized. These prophecies mentioned specific signs, born of a certain place but uncertain parents, of a certain age under a certain sign, immune to disease, able to unite the Ashlander tribes, able to name Nerevar's household name, and ultimately able to recover the artifact Moon and Star. The Tribunal Temple declared the cult heretical and outlawed it. This makes sense from their perspective. The cult's existence was basically calling them liars and usurpers. If Nerevar really was coming back to overthrow them, that directly threatened their authority. The temple viewed the prophecies as primitive superstition and the cult members as troublemakers stirring up anti-imperial sentiment. The Empire backed the temple's ban. They arrested and imprisoned cult members, with some facing execution. The ordinators, the temple's military arm, were given free rein to deal with cult activities as they saw fit. This forced the cult to operate in secret, mostly among the Ashlander camps where imperial authority was weakest. The dissident priests, a group within the temple who questioned the tribunal's teachings, were more sympathetic to the cult. They didn't necessarily believe in the prophecies themselves, but they thought the persecution was unjust and politically motivated. Some of them even started studying the nerevarine prophecies as legitimate mystical texts rather than dangerous heresies. The cult's beliefs were based on their interpretation of events at Red Mountain. According to them, the tribunal murdered Nerevar and used Kagranak's tools to steal godhood from the heart of Lorkhan, violating Nerevar's dying commands. They broke their oath to Azura, which is why she cursed the Chimer into becoming Dwemer, with ash-gray skin and red eyes. The tribunal were false gods who built their power on murder and betrayal. Most Ashlanders viewed the tribunal as living people who achieved some form of supernatural power, not actual gods. They saw Almalexia, Sotasil, and Vivek as abominations, mortals trying to play at divinity. The nerevarine prophecies predicted their downfall, which is why the tribunal fought so hard to suppress them. The cult didn't have a formal structure like other organizations. It was more of a shared belief system among Ashlanders. The tribal wise women and Ashkans kept the prophecies alive. They would test visitors to see if they might be the nerevarine. The Urshilaku tribe specifically had a place called the Cavern of the Incarnate, where all the previous failed incarnates were buried, people who claimed to be Nerevar reborn but died before fulfilling the prophecy. When the actual nerevarine showed up in 3E427, everything changed. This person fulfilled the prophecies one by one. They united the Ashlander tribes by being named Hortator. They recovered Moon and Star from the Cavern of the Incarnate. They destroyed Dagoth and severed the source of the tribunal's power. The cult was vindicated. They were right all along. After Morrowind, during the Oblivion Crisis and Red Year, the tribunal temple crumbled. Almalexia went mad and was killed by the nerevarine. Sotasil was already dead, also killed by Almalexia. Vivek disappeared, possibly killed by the nerevarine or just abandoning Morrowind to its fate. The Dwemer eventually returned to worshipping the Reclamations, Azura, Bawetia, and Mephala. The nerevarine prophecies became accepted history. The theories around this cult are less about what if they were right and more about how did they know. The prophecies were incredibly specific. Were they actual visions from Azura, who saw the future? Were they based on patterns from past attempts by Nerevar's reincarnations? Or were they self-fulfilling? The cult set up circumstances that would create a nerevarine, whether one naturally occurred or not. There's also the question of whether the player character in Morrowind actually was Nerevar reborn, or just someone who fit the prophecies well enough to play the role. The game deliberately leaves this ambiguous. Dagoth calls you Nerevar and speaks as if he genuinely recognizes you. But you can also roleplay as someone who's just taking advantage of a political situation. Some scholars think Azura literally reincarnated Nerevar's soul, others think she just picked a mortal and empowered them to fulfill the role. Another interesting angle is what the cult got wrong. They thought the nerevarine would drive out all Outlanders. That didn't happen. The Empire continued to control Morrowind, and plenty of non-Dwemer remained. They thought traditional Ashlander ways would be restored. Instead, Morrowind went through cataclysms that destroyed much of the traditional power structures. The nerevarine disappeared shortly after fulfilling the prophecy, possibly leaving to Akavir. So while the cult was right about the big picture, the details didn't quite match their expectations. Now let's talk about everyone's favorite murder organization, the Dark Brotherhood. Technically, they're banned across basically all of Tamriel. Being a member is illegal. Performing the Black Sacrament to summon them is illegal, but they persist anyway because, well, people want other people dead, and they're willing to pay for it. The Brotherhood's origins trace back to the Morak Tong, the legal assassins guild of Morrowind. The Tong worshipped Mephala, the Daedric prince of murder, and performed ritual killings as acts of religious devotion. They operated openly in Morrowind, executing writs, legal assassination contracts issued by the great houses as a form of political conflict resolution. Everything changed in the year 2920 of the First Era, when the Morak Tong assassinated Emperor Reman III. Then, in the year 324 of the Second Era, they killed Reman's successor, potentate Versidushaye. This second killing was particularly brazen. The assassins literally painted Morag Tong in the potentate's blood on the palace walls. The empire responded by outlawing the Morag Tong throughout all provinces except Morrowind. The organization went into hiding for nearly a century. During this period of persecution, a schism formed within the Morak Tong. The exact cause is debated, but it seems to have been religious in nature. A faction split off and formed the Dark Brotherhood, shifting their worship from Mephala to Sithis, the primordial void. They also started revering the Night Mother, a mysterious figure who serves as their spiritual leader. The Night Mother's identity is unclear. Some sources say she was a mortal woman who was Sithis' lover and bore him 5 children, sacrificing them all to him. Others suggest she's an aspect of Mephala herself, playing a deeper game. What's certain is that she communicates with a person called the Listener, who receives contracts through her whispers and distributes them through speakers to the rest of the Brotherhood. The key difference between the Morak Tong and Dark Brotherhood is business model. The Tong remained a religious cult focused on honor killings and political assassinations. The Brotherhood became a murder-for-hire operation. They killed anyone for any reason as long as the client paid enough. This made them more commercially successful, but also more dangerous to societal stability. The Brotherhood's structure during the Third and early Fourth Era revolved around the Black Hand, 5 members who governed the organization. 4 speakers represented the Fingers, each with their own territory and network of assassins. 1 listener represented the Thumb, communicating with the Night Mother. Each speaker had personal assistants called Silencers, who were technically part of the Black Hand, but kept secret from regular members. Below the Black Hand were the regular assassins, organized into sanctuaries scattered across Tamriel. Each sanctuary operated semi-independently, but followed the 5 tenets, a set of unbreakable rules. First, never dishonor the Night Mother. Second, never betray the Dark Brotherhood or its secrets. Third, never disobey or refuse an order from a superior. Fourth, never steal from the Brotherhood or another Dark Brother. Fifth, never kill another Dark Brother. Breaking a tenet resulted in the wrath of Sithis. Another assassin would be sent to kill you. You got 1 chance at redemption, then permanent exile or death. The tenets were enforced ruthlessly because without them, an organization full of murderers would immediately tear itself apart. To summon the Brotherhood, you performed the Black Sacrament. This involved creating a human effigy from body parts, a skull, bones, flesh, and a human heart. You'd place it in a ritual circle, stab the effigy, and chant, sweet mother, send your child unto me, for the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear." If the Night Mother deemed your plea worthy, a member of the Brotherhood would appear to discuss the contract. The price varied dramatically based on the target. Killing a random peasant might cost a few hundred gold. Killing a nobleman could cost thousands. Killing someone like the Emperor was so expensive that only the wealthiest organizations could afford it. The Brotherhood also wouldn't accept conflicting contracts. They'd never take a job to kill someone if they already had a contract to protect them. Throughout history, the Dark Brotherhood has been responsible for some of Tamriel's most infamous assassinations. They killed Emperor Pelagius I in 3E41 while he was praying in the Temple of the One. They're suspected in the deaths of numerous kings, jarls, and high-ranking officials. In 3E433, They had contracts to kill various targets across Cyrodiil, from wealthy merchants to rival assassins. But around 3E 325, the Brotherhood suffered a massive internal power struggle over the Daedric artifact Mehrunes Razor. This conflict nearly destroyed the organization, killing large numbers of members. The Brotherhood survived, but was severely weakened. Then, in 3E421, came the Crimson Scars incident. A member named Graywyn Blenwith, who was also a vampire, had visions that he believed came from Sithis. He interpreted these visions as a command to transform the entire Brotherhood into vampires. Graywyn recruited other vampires into the organization and started secretly infecting non-vampire members with porphyric hemophilia. Graywyn's plan was to eventually control enough vampires to overthrow the Black Hand and claim the Brotherhood for the undead. He called his faction the Crimson Scars, named for the vicious neck wounds his assassins left on victims. However, a dwemer member named Silarion betrayed the Crimson Scars to the Black Hand. The Brotherhood struck at night while the Crimson Scars slept, using silver weapons. Most of them were killed, reduced to ash. Graywyn and one other member, Rowley Eardwolf, escaped to a place called Deep Scorn Hollow. From his sanctuary, Graywyn continued to hunt and kill Dark Brotherhood members, sacrificing their blood to Sithis. He tried to rebuild the Crimson Scars, but got another vision that disturbed him. This time, he realized Sithis didn't actually want a vampire brotherhood. Graywyn found purge blood salts, an alchemical ingredient that could cure vampirism, and planned to purge himself and his remaining followers. What happened after that is unknown. Graywyn was eventually hunted down and killed, but the exact circumstances aren't recorded. Shortly after this, during the Oblivion crisis, the Brotherhood was infiltrated and betrayed from within. A member named Mathieu Bellamont convinced the hero of Kuach that several Brotherhood members were traitors who needed to be killed. This led to what's called a purification, the killing of an entire sanctuary. Afterward, Bellamont was revealed as the real traitor. His mother had been murdered by the Brotherhood years earlier at the request of his own father, and he'd spent his entire life infiltrating the organization to get revenge. The purification weakened the Brotherhood significantly. After the Great War between the Empire and Aldmeri Dominion, the Brotherhood continued to decline. By the Fourth Era, many sanctuaries across Tamriel had been destroyed or abandoned. The governing structure of the Black Hand collapsed. By 4E201, only a single sanctuary remained active, the one near Falkreath in Skyrim, led by a woman named Astrid. Astrid had abandoned the old ways. She didn't follow the 5 tenets. She didn't revere the Night Mother or listen for Sithis. She ran the sanctuary as a pure business, assassins for hire with no religious trappings. This caused tension when Cicero, the keeper of the Night Mother's physical body, showed up trying to restore the old traditions. The Falkreath sanctuary eventually came under attack by the Penitus Oculatus, the Emperor's security force. The assault destroyed the sanctuary and killed most of its members. The survivors, Nazir, Babette, and possibly Cicero, relocated to the abandoned Dawnstar Sanctuary. Whether the Brotherhood survived beyond that is unknown. The theories around the Dark Brotherhood are fascinating. First, there's the question of whether Sithis is real or if it's all just murderers justifying their actions with religion. Sithis is described as the primordial void, the force of chaos and change that existed before creation. Can such a force have agency or consciousness? Some scholars think the Night Mother is really just Mephala manipulating the Brotherhood. Others think Sithis is real and the Brotherhood genuinely serves a cosmic force of entropy. Second, how does the Night Mother actually communicate? The listener claims to hear her voice, but only the listener can hear it. Is it telepathy, divine inspiration, self-delusion? The fact that the listeners have historically made accurate predictions and received detailed information about contracts suggests something supernatural is happening. Third, why does Sithis sometimes appear to intervene directly? When someone breaks a tenet, the wrath of Sithis is more than just another assassin. Strange, supernatural phenomena occur. Spectral assassins materialize from nowhere. In Skyrim, when you honor the Night Mother's contracts, you receive a blessing called Sithis Boon that makes you more effective at stealth kills. How does a primordial void of nothingness grant blessings? Fourth, what's the relationship between the Dark Brotherhood and the Shadow Scales? In Black Marsh, Argonians born under the sign of the Shadow are taken at birth and trained as assassins. They serve the Argonian kingdom but are automatically members of the Dark Brotherhood when they come of age. This suggests the Brotherhood has some kind of formal arrangement with Black Marsh's government, which contradicts their status as an illegal organization everywhere else. Finally, why do governments tolerate the Brotherhood? They're illegal but rarely actively hunted. Even rulers who could deploy armies to wipe them out usually don't. The obvious answer is fear. If you go after the Brotherhood, you become a target. But there's also practical politics. Sometimes rulers need someone murdered discreetly, and the Brotherhood provides a service that can't be found elsewhere. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement where everyone pretends the Brotherhood doesn't exist. Let's jump back to the Second Era and talk about the Order of the Waking Flame, another Mehrunes Dagon cult that predates the mythic dawn by centuries. This one's interesting because it shows that Dagon has been trying to invade Tamriel for a really long time, and he's got multiple cults working toward that goal across different time periods. The Waking Flame was founded during the reign of the Longhouse Emperors, which was around the Second Era during the Interregnum. Emperor Morikar and his dynasty had taken control of the Ruby Throne after overthrowing the legitimate Reman line. The Longhouse Emperors were controversial rulers with ties to Reachfolk, mysticism, and Daedric worship, so it makes sense that a Daedric cult would thrive under their rule. The cult was led by a woman named Sister Tseldina, though before her, the leadership included Councillor Vandatia, who was one of the Longhouse Emperor's advisors. The cult believed that Mehrunes Dagon deserved to rule Nirn and that they were his instruments of transformation and revolution. They saw Dagon as the prince of ambition, not just destruction, and they wanted to help him achieve his rightful place. The cult's hierarchy included ranks like High Priest, Doombringer, Disastrix, Razor, and Devastator. They held elaborate rituals involving conjured flames, lava, storms, and lightning. Their chant went, "Lord Dagon, we stand ready. Lord Dagon, show us your ambitions. Lord Dagon, your revolution is our revolution. Nirn shall be yours." What made the Waking Flame particularly dangerous was their connection to political power. Members weren't just religious fanatics hiding in caves. They were wealthy nobles, influential merchants, and government officials. In cities like Leawin and Gideon, the cult operated openly as what appeared to be a philosophical society or exclusive social club. Authorities dismissed them as harmless because they looked respectable. This allowed them to recruit from the upper classes and operate with minimal interference. The cult had ties to Emperor Leovich, the last Longhouse Emperor, though the exact nature of this connection is murky. When Varan Aquilarios overthrew Leovich and claimed the throne, triggering the events that led to the Soul Burst, the Waking Flame went underground. But they didn't disappear, they just got more secretive. Their big plan involved something called the Four Ambitions. These were mortals infused with incredible power by Mehrunes Dagon himself. The details are complex, but essentially, the Longhouse Emperors made a pact with Dagon. In exchange for power, they agreed to create these ambitions who could serve as anchors to bring Dagon fully into Nirn. The Waking Flame spent decades hunting down the Four Ambitions to complete the ritual. The cult also framed the Dark Brotherhood for a series of assassinations. They murdered several former members of the Elder Council who had served under the Longhouse Emperors, but they did it in ways that made it look like Brotherhood hits. This was clever. It redirected attention away from them and caused the Brotherhood problems. The cult even attacked a brotherhood sanctuary using daedric portal magic, killing many dark brothers. Sister Seldina, the second leader, was particularly devout. She'd studied forbidden texts at the Priory of the Golden Staff in Stormhaven and developed her own interpretation of Dagon's nature. She believed Dagon represented necessary change through destruction, that the world had to be purified by fire to be reborn better. Her followers were absolutely loyal, willing to die for the cause. The cult established several bases across Blackwood and even in the Deadlands themselves. They had a fortress called Brandfire Reformatory, where they conducted experiments and stored artifacts. Vandesha had his own keep in the Deadlands granted to him directly by Dagon. The cult also occupied ancient Aelid ruins and imperial facilities, turning them into staging grounds for their invasion. When the cult finally attempted to bring Dagon to Nirn, they attacked Fort Redmain in Blackwood. The battle was massive, Waking Flame cultists and Daedric forces assaulting a coalition of defenders. The cult managed to temporarily merge sections of Nirn with the Deadlands, creating zones where reality itself broke down. Dagon himself appeared, a giant four-armed entity of destruction, and fought directly, but the Vestige and their allies stopped the invasion, killing Vandesha and scattering the cult. After this defeat, the Waking Flame fractured. Sister Seldina took over leadership and retreated to a realm called Deadlight, a pocket of oblivion she controlled. The cult continued operating, but on a much smaller scale. Eventually they were defeated again, though small cells likely survived into later eras. The theories about the Waking Flame mostly revolve around their relationship with the mythic dawn. Did Mankar Camoran know about the Waking Flame? The mythic dawn emerged about 800 years after the Waking Flame's major activities. It's possible Mankar discovered records of the earlier cult and built on their ideas. Both cults had very similar beliefs: that Tamriel belonged to Dagon, that revolution was necessary, that mortals needed to be transformed. Both used complex rituals and had hierarchical structures. Both targeted the Ruby Throne. Some scholars think Mehrunes Dagon has a pattern of creating cults, using them to attempt an invasion, and when they fail, just starting over with a new cult centuries later. The Waking Flame failed, so he waited and created the Mythic Dawn. The Mythic Dawn failed during the Oblivion Crisis, so maybe in another few centuries he'll try again with yet another cult. It suggests Dagon is extremely patient and persistent. Another theory is that the Four Ambitions plan was more sophisticated than the Oblivion Crisis plan. The Crisis relied on brute force, open portals everywhere, and flood Nirn with Daedra. The Ambitions plan was subtle: create living anchors who could permanently weaken the barriers. If it had worked, Dagon might have been able to manifest on Nirn indefinitely without needing the Amulet of Kings. The fact that it failed doesn't mean it wasn't a better strategy. There's also questions about Sister Seldina's theology. She claimed Dagon represented transformation and progress, not mindless destruction. She genuinely believed the world would be better under Dagon's rule. Was she delusional, or did she understand something about Dagon that others missed? Mehrunes Dagon's fear includes change, revolution, and energy, not just destruction. Maybe from a certain perspective, burning down the old world to build a new one is a form of progress. Now let's talk about something that's technically banned, but is kind of different from the other cults: the worship of Talos. This one's unique because Talos worship was the official state religion of the Empire for centuries, then got banned for political reasons, but millions of people still believe in it. Talos, also known as Tiber Septim, was the guy who conquered all of Tamriel and founded the Third Empire. When he died, he achieved apotheosis and became a divine, the ninth divine, joining the existing 8. Worship of Talos became standard throughout the Empire, especially in Skyrim, where he was born. The ban came about because of the Great War between the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion. The Thalmor, who controlled the Dominion, had a massive problem with Talos worship. See, Talos was a human who became a god. The Thalmor are Altmer supremacists who believe only elves should be divine. The idea of a human achieving the same status as the ancient Aedra was deeply offensive to them. Plus, Talos had conquered and brutally subjugated the Somerset Isles, and the Altmer hadn't forgotten. When the Dominion went to war with the Empire, they were winning pretty badly. The imperial city fell, the emperor almost died, and the empire was on the verge of collapse. To secure peace, Emperor Titus Mede II signed the White Gold Concordat in 4E 175. One of the treaty's main terms was outlawing Talos worship throughout imperial territory. This caused absolute chaos in Skyrim. Nords revered Talos as one of their own. Skyrim has more Talos shrines than anywhere else. Telling Nords they can't worship Talos is like telling them to deny their own heritage. A lot of Nords saw the treaty as a betrayal by the Empire. This resentment eventually led to the Stormcloak Rebellion, with Ulfric Stormcloak leading a faction trying to make Skyrim independent so they could worship Talos freely. The Thalmor enforced the ban through the Justiciars, their secret police. They traveled throughout Skyrim and other provinces, arresting people caught worshipping Talos. The punishment varied from imprisonment to execution. They also conducted raids on suspected Talos worshippers, tore down shrines, and interrogated citizens. The Justiciars became the most hated people in Skyrim because they represented foreign oppression of Nord religion. But here's the thing, the ban was only partially enforced. In places like Whiterun, you could still find Talos shrines, and priests like Heimskr would openly preach about Talos in the town square. The Jarls often looked the other way, because cracking down too hard would cause riots. Only when the Thalmor specifically showed up would they pretend to enforce the ban. So it became this weird situation where Talos worship was illegal, but also kind of not, depending on who was watching. The underground Talos worship operated differently in different regions. In some places, it was openly practiced with everyone pretending it wasn't happening. In others, it moved into homes and secret shrines. The Blades, the old imperial dragon-slaying order, became protectors of Talos worship since they'd always been loyal to the dragonborn emperors. They hid Talos shrines and sheltered worshippers on the run. The theological implications are interesting. The Empire officially said Talos was no longer a divine, but the priests and worshippers insisted his divinity was real and couldn't be taken away by a treaty. They pointed to the blessings received at Talos shrines as proof. You could still get divine powers from praying to him, which suggested he was still active as a god even if the Empire denied it. This created a weird situation where the Imperial Legion, which enforced imperial law, had soldiers who privately worshipped Talos. Officers like General Tullius didn't personally care about the religion, but had to enforce the ban to maintain order. Meanwhile, soldiers who were Nord would secretly pray to Talos before battle. The Legion became full of people enforcing a law they didn't believe in. The Stormcloak Rebellion framed the fight as about religious freedom, but it was more complicated. Yes, they wanted to worship Talos freely, but they also wanted Nordic independence, control over Skyrim's resources, and the expulsion of non-Nords from positions of power. Their religious element was genuine, but also served as propaganda to recruit people who might not otherwise care about politics. The theories around Talos worship are super meta. First, is Talos actually divine? Some scholars say yes, he mentored Lorkhan and achieved Kim, becoming part of the divine pantheon. Others say the Talos worshipped is actually a combination of three people, Tiber Septim, Zurin Arctus, and Ulfric Nerevar, merged into one oversoul. Still others think Talos was never actually divine and people are just venerating a dead emperor. Second, do the Thalmor have a hidden agenda? Some theorists believe the Thalmor don't just want to ban Talos worship for political or revenge reasons. They actually think that if enough people stop believing in Talos, he'll cease to be divine. In Elder Scrolls metaphysics, the Aedra are sustained by mortal worship. By eliminating Talos worship, the Thalmor might be trying to unmake his divinity, which would retroactively change history and weaken humanity. This ties into even deeper Thalmor goals. Some believe the Thalmor ultimately want to unmake the mortal world entirely and return to the pre-creation state when elves were immortal spirits. Talos represents mortality achieving divinity, which is the opposite of their goals. By destroying Talos, they're taking a step toward unmaking reality. Third, was the ban necessary? Some imperial apologists argue that the Empire had no choice, accept the treaty or face total destruction. The survival of the Empire was more important than one religious practice. Others say the Empire should have kept fighting, rather than betray its own people. There's no clear answer because we don't know if the Empire could have survived if they'd refused the Concordat. Finally, does Talos actually care? He's a god now, presumably. Does he care that his worship is banned? Is he doing anything about it? The complete silence from Talos himself suggests either he can't interfere, doesn't want to, or isn't actually listening. This ambiguity keeps the theological debate alive. Let's talk about necromancy in general, which has been banned in various times and places throughout Tamriel's history, though it's complicated. Necromancy is the manipulation of souls and corpses, raising the dead, binding spirits, all that fun stuff. Whether it's illegal depends on where you are and what era you're in. In Morrowind, necromancy has traditionally been illegal, at least when it involves Dwemer corpses or souls. The Dwemer have strong ancestral worship traditions. Defiling the dead is seen as one of the worst crimes possible. However, the ban has loopholes. You can use non-Dwemer corpses, and certain practices like summoning ancestor spirits for guidance are considered acceptable rather than necromantic. The Empire's stance on necromancy has varied. For most of Tamriel's history, it's been technically legal in Cyrodiil, but heavily regulated. Practicing necromancers need licenses and contracts. There are legal frameworks around post-mortem ownership of bodies and souls, handled by the Guild of Barristers. You can actually sell your body and soul to a necromancer before you die, setting up a contract where they get to use your remains after your death. It's creepy, but legal. During the Planimelt in the Second Era, Manimarco managed to get necromancy fully legalized in Imperial territory by positioning the Order of the Black Worm as the official magical advisors to the throne. This was one of the few periods where necromancy wasn't just tolerated, but openly practiced in the capital. Then came the big ban in 3E431. Hannibal Traven became Archmage of the Mages Guild and immediately banned all necromancy from the guild. Before this, necromancy was frowned upon, but allowed. Members who practice it had to be discreet, especially in provinces like Morrowind, where it was illegal. Traven's ban was absolute. Anyone caught practicing necromancy would be expelled, no exceptions. The ban devastated the guild. Half the Council of Mages resigned in protest. Scores of mages left to continue their necromantic studies independently. The guild was severely weakened, losing a huge portion of its membership and institutional knowledge. Traven wrote a book called The Black Arts on Trial, defending his decision, arguing that necromancy was inherently corrupting and the risks outweighed any benefits. Traven drew on the teachings of the Sigic Order and Vanis Gallerion, both of whom had opposed necromancy. The book presented a debate between two magisters, one arguing for necromancy, one against. Ironically, the pro-necromancy magister, Ulicheta Grakog, turned out to be a secret necromancer herself. Traven still used her arguments in the book to show he'd considered both sides before making his decision. The ban backfired spectacularly. All those expelled necromancers, they went straight to Manimarco and the Order of the Black Worm. The worm cult grew rapidly in both numbers and power. Then Manimarco launched a full assault on the Mages Guild, seeking to destroy it completely. The war between the guild and the cult was brutal, with significant casualties on both sides. Archmage Traven's protege eventually defeated Manimarco, but the guild was left in ruins. After Traven died and his protege became the new Archmage, the ban remained in place. During and after the Oblivion Crisis, public opinion on necromancy shifted even more negative. The association between necromancy and daedric cults, particularly Molag Bal's involvement with vampirism and soul manipulation, turned most people against it. By the Fourth Era, necromancy is generally illegal or heavily restricted across most of Tamriel. Different schools of necromancy exist with varying approaches. Cyrodiilic necromancy focuses on practical applications, using corpses as servants and protectors. Imperial aesthetic necromancy involves creating taxidermied simulacra of creatures, which most people don't even consider necromancy. Dwemer necromancy specializes in composite creatures, building complex undead from multiple body parts. The making of ancestor silk from the souls of ancestors is a traditional Dwemer practice that outsiders consider necromancy, but Dwemer don't. Nordic draugr are sometimes classified as undead, though their exact nature is debated. Were they created by necromancy, or is something else going on? The philosophical necromancers argue that death is just another state of existence to be studied and understood. They see themselves as scholars pushing the boundaries of knowledge, not evil cultists. Many of them willingly donate their bodies to their colleagues for study after they die. They argue the ban is based on superstition and fear rather than rational concerns. The opposition to necromancy comes from multiple angles. The Order of Archai fights necromancers because manipulating the dead violates the natural cycle of life and death. Archai is the god of that cycle, so necromancy is literally blasphemy against him. The Order works to protect mortal souls from being trapped or corrupted and will actively hunt necromancers they deem dangerous. Molag Bal delights in necromancy, which is another reason it's viewed negatively. He created vampires specifically to spite Archai by creating a form of undeath that circumvents the death cycle. Necromancers who serve Molag Bal tend to be especially cruel, using their arts to torture and enslave souls. The association between necromancy and Molag Bal taints the practice in public opinion. The legal status creates weird situations. Necromancy is legal in Cyrodiil, but illegal in Morrowind. So you can study necromancy at the Arcane University in the Imperial City, but if you cross the border into Morrowind and do the same thing, you'll be arrested. Some necromancers operate in legal gray zones, technically following the law while doing deeply unethical things with corpses. The theories about necromancy get into deep metaphysics. What exactly are souls? Where do they go after death? When a necromancer binds a soul to a gem or animates a corpse, what is actually happening? If you resurrect someone, is it really them or just an echo? Some schools of thought say souls go to the dream sleeve after death, a sort of recycling system where they're cleansed and eventually reincarnated. Soul trapping and necromancy interfere with this process. Other schools say souls go to various afterlives depending on the person's beliefs and deeds. Archai claims souls that worshipped him. Daedric princes claim the souls of their followers. Necromancy hijacks this system. There's debate about whether necromancy is inherently evil or just a tool that can be misused. Proponents point out that using a summoned skeleton to defend yourself from bandits isn't hurting anyone. The person's soul has moved on, and you're just animating their remains. Opponents say defiling the dead is wrong, regardless of practical benefits, and that necromancy inevitably leads practitioners down dark paths. The connection between necromancy and corpus in Morrowind raises questions. Dagoth, Ur's divine disease, transformed people into undead-like creatures. Was this actually necromancy or something else entirely? It involved souls and bodies being warped by divine power from the heart of Lorkhan. Some classify it as necromancy on a massive scale. Others say it's a unique magical phenomenon. Finally, there's the question of whether banning necromancy actually works. The ban in the Mages Guild didn't stop necromancy, it just pushed it underground and made necromancers harder to regulate. When necromancy was legal but regulated, authorities could at least keep track of who was practicing it and what they were doing. The ban might have made things worse by removing oversight. Let me talk briefly about some smaller cult bans that are worth mentioning. In Cyrodiil, particularly in the Nibene region, there are these cultural groups called societies that are basically social and religious organizations. Most of them are legal, like the Bull Society for conservative landowners or the Viper Society for battle mages. But then there's the Tiger Society, which has been illegal since at least the First Era. This cult practices tiger worship and is infamous for cannibalistic rituals and manhunts. Yeah, you read that right, they hunt people for sport and eat them. This emerged from old Nibonese totemic practices that got twisted into something deeply disturbing. The exact beliefs are unclear because members don't exactly advertise their membership, but it involves some combination of beast worship, bloodthirsty rituals, and seeing themselves as apex predators. The Tiger Society gets hunted down whenever authorities find them, but they keep popping back up. It's believed they recruit from the wealthy and bored, people looking for increasingly extreme thrills. The mystery and illegality actually makes it more attractive to certain types. There are rumors that some noble houses in the Nibene have secret Tiger Society connections, but proving this is nearly impossible. Other illegal cults in Cyrodiil tend to be Daedric in nature. The Tribunal bans worship of Myrun's Dagon, Molagbal, Vaermina, and other evil princes, but enforcement varies wildly. As we've seen with the Mythic Dawn and Waking Flame, these cults can grow huge before anyone shuts them down. The Empire tends to be reactive rather than proactive. They let cults exist until they cause problems, then crack down hard. There's also the Alessian Order, which isn't exactly banned but did collapse and get condemned. This was a religious order from the First Era that preached strict monotheism, believing in the One as the only true deity. They became incredibly powerful and oppressive, controlling the empire for a time. Their persecution of other faiths and enforcement of bizarre doctrines eventually caused a massive backlash. When they fell, practices associated with them became taboo. Some argue they were technically a cult that somehow gained mainstream power before being rejected. I touched on this earlier when talking about the Dark Brotherhood, but the Crimson Scars deserve a deeper look. This wasn't just a splinter group, it was a serious threat to one of Tamriel's oldest organizations, and represents one of the few times the Brotherhood faced an existential internal crisis. Greywind Blenwith was an Altmer vampire who joined the Dark Brotherhood around 3E421, but he didn't join to be a regular assassin. He'd received what he interpreted as visions from Sithis commanding him to transform the entire Brotherhood into vampires. In his mind, vampires were the perfect assassins. Stronger, faster, immortal, with natural stealth abilities. Sithis surely wanted his servants to be as powerful as possible. Greywind was methodical about it. He recruited other vampires into the Brotherhood, placing them in key positions. He started secretly infecting non-vampire members with porphyric hemophilia. His plan was gradual, convert enough members that when he made his move, the vampires would outnumber the mortals. Then he'd overthrow the Black Hand, take control of the organization, and complete the transformation. Anyone who refused to become a vampire would be eliminated. He called his faction the Crimson Scars, named for the distinctive wounds his vampires left, jagged neck lacerations far more savage than typical assassination cuts. The Scars operated in secret, maintaining their cover as regular Brotherhood members while building their network. The plan fell apart because of Silarion, a Dwemer who Greywind had turned into a vampire. Silarion didn't share Greywind's vision. When he learned about the coup plot, he went to the Black Hand and revealed everything: the identities of the Crimson Scars, the infection plot, the overthrow plan. The Black Hand's response was swift and brutal. They declared the second purification in Brotherhood history, a mass killing of members deemed traitors. The Hand struck at night while the Crimson Scars slept, taking advantage of vampires' daytime weakness. They used silver weapons, which are particularly effective against vampires. Most of the Crimson Scars were killed, their bodies reduced to ash piles. Only 2 survived the purification: Greywind himself and another member named Rolly-Eared Wolf. Greywind fled to Deepscorn Hollow, his old sanctuary in Cyrodiil. This place was perfect for vampires, hidden cave system, defensible, with facilities for alchemical work. He fortified it and waited for other survivors to find him. Days turned into weeks with no one showing up. Greywind realized he'd lost. His visions from cities had stopped. He spent his time hunting and killing regular Dark Brotherhood members, dragging their bodies to his shrine and sacrificing them, hoping cities would speak to him again. Eventually, Rowley found him at the Wannet Inn, and they began rebuilding. Rowley supplied furniture, resources, and brought in new contracts. Deepscorn Hollow became operational again as a sanctuary. But then Greywind received another vision, and this one destroyed everything he believed. Cities spoke to him clearly. The Dark Brotherhood was not meant to be claimed by vampires. Greywind had misunderstood his original visions. What he'd interpreted as a divine command was actually either self-delusion or manipulation by some other force. Sithis didn't want a vampire brotherhood. Greywind was devastated. Everything he'd done, the infections, the plotting, getting his brothers killed, was based on a lie. He'd betrayed the Brotherhood for nothing. In penance, he sought a cure for vampirism. He found obscure texts mentioning purge blood salts, an alchemical reagent that could restore vampires to mortality. He spent months gathering the ingredients. What happened next is unclear. Different accounts exist. Some say Greywind successfully cured himself and his vampirism, becoming mortal again before being hunted down by the Brotherhood. Others say he was assassinated before he could use the purge blood salts. Some claim he gave ownership of Deepscorn Hollow to a distant relative, possibly the hero of Kuwatch, before his death. The Crimson Scars never reformed. The name became a cautionary tale within the Brotherhood, a reminder of what happens when personal ambition conflicts with Sithis' will. Vampires continue to exist within the Brotherhood after this incident, which suggests Sithis doesn't oppose vampires as members, just the idea of an exclusively vampire organization. The theories around the Crimson Scars are interesting. First, did Greywind's original visions actually come from Sithis, or was he manipulated? Some think Mephala, who has connections to both the Moraktong and possibly the Night Mother, might have been playing games. By nearly destroying the Brotherhood from within, she could have been weakening a rival organization. Others think Greywind just went mad and hallucinated the whole thing. Second, why does the Brotherhood tolerate vampires at all if Sithis supposedly rejected them? Every Brotherhood sanctuary we see has at least one vampire member. They're accepted and even valued for their abilities. The problem wasn't vampirism itself, but Greywind's attempt at takeover. This suggests the Brotherhood is pragmatic. They'll use anyone useful regardless of their nature. Third, how did Greywind misinterpret the visions so badly? If he was genuinely receiving divine messages, wouldn't they be clear? The nature of Sithis communication is vague. It's described as whispers, feelings, impressions. The listener hears the Night Mother, who speaks for Sithis, but regular members don't get direct messages. Greywind might have experienced something real, but filtered it through his own biases and desires, creating a narrative that justified what he already wanted to do. Finally, the Purge Blood Souls raise questions about vampirism in Elder Scrolls. If a cure exists that's relatively accessible, why aren't more vampires using it? Most vampires accept their condition or even embrace it. The idea that someone would seek godlike power through vampirism, build an entire conspiracy around it, then desperately try to cure themselves suggests deep regret. Was Greywind uniquely weak-willed, or did he understand something about vampirism that others miss? So yeah, that's the rundown on banned cults in the Elder Scrolls. From reality-warping apocalypse cults like the Mythic Dawn, to vampire assassins like the Crimson Scars, from disease-spreading god monsters like the Sixth House, to political religious persecution like the Talos ban, Tamriel has seen it all. What makes these interesting is that banned doesn't mean gone. These organizations keep coming back or operating in secret. The Dark Brotherhood is illegal everywhere, but never disappears. The mythic dawn was destroyed, but someone tried to revive it centuries later. The sixth house got wiped out but left questions about survivors and descendants. The Order of the Black Worm gets defeated repeatedly, but Manimarco keeps coming back. This persistence suggests something deeper about the nature of cults in Tamriel. They're not just organizations, they're ideas. You can kill every member of a cult, burn their sanctuaries, outlaw their practices, and ban their texts. But as long as the idea remains attractive to people, someone will eventually pick it up and start fresh. Whether it's the promise of power through necromancy, the dream of religious revolution, or the dark satisfaction of assassination for profit, these concepts don't die. The metaphysics of Elder Scrolls makes this even weirder. Daedric princes are eternal and patient. If Mehrunes Dagon's cult fails, he'll just create another one in a few centuries. Sithis, if he's real, exists outside time. The concept of void and chaos will always attract certain people. Even mortal leaders like Manimarco achieve forms of immortality that let them keep their organizations going across multiple eras. Government responses to cults follow similar patterns. They're usually reactive rather than proactive. Authorities tolerate weird religious groups until they become an obvious threat, then crack down hard. The problem is determining when a cult crosses from strange but harmless to existential danger. By the time the threat is obvious, the cult has usually grown powerful enough that stopping it requires massive effort and bloodshed. The religious freedom angle makes this complicated. In a world with multiple real gods, various Daedric princes who grant actual power to followers, and magic that demonstrably works, where do you draw the line? Molag Bal worship seems obviously evil, but he's a real entity who really grants power to his followers. Is banning his worship religious persecution or reasonable public safety? The Empire struggles with this constantly. The sociological aspect is fascinating too. Cults recruit by offering something people desperately want. The Mythic Dawn offered meaning and purpose. The Worm cult offered mastery over death. The Sixth House offered unity with a god and freedom from foreign rule. The Dark Brotherhood offered power and a family that never rejects you. These aren't random promises. They're responses to real human needs. As long as people feel powerless, purposeless, or oppressed, cults will find recruits. And finally, there's the question of truth. Some of these cults turned out to be right about major things. The nerevarine cult was correct. Nerevar did return and destroy the false tribunal. Their persecution was unjust. Does this mean we should trust cult claims more? Obviously not, because for every nerevarine cult that gets vindicated, there are dozens that are just crazy or evil. But it adds moral complexity. Let me circle back to the Mythic Dawn because there's so much weird stuff about them that deserves attention. The recruitment process was incredibly elaborate. Potential members had to obtain all 4 volumes of the commentaries, which was already difficult. The first volume, Sever the Seared Lash, was rare, but could be found in certain bookshops. You had to know where to look, but it was obtainable. The second volume, Whirlwind Queen, was harder. Only specific booksellers would carry it, and they'd only sell to people who demonstrated interest in Daedric philosophy. The third volume, Gartok, or the Book of Destruction, required special orders through underground channels, and the fourth volume, Red Armor in Paler Flame, could only be obtained from a Mythic Dawn sponsor who judged you worthy, but getting the books was just step 1. You then had to decode the hidden message. Taking the first letter of each paragraph in all 4 books spelled out a location and instructions. This wasn't easy. It required careful reading, pattern recognition, and cryptographic skill. The message led to Lake Arius Caverns, which was the cult's main sanctuary in Cyrodiil. Inside the caverns, initiates went through a ceremony. Mankar would personally greet new members, welcoming them to the family and explaining the deeper mysteries. New initiates received Mythic Dawn robes and often a ceremonial dagger. They were taught the cult's beliefs in depth, that Tamriel was rightfully Dagon's realm, that the Aedra were usurpers, that mortals needed to be liberated from the tyranny of the dragon's blood. The cult had different ranks. Regular members were just called Mythic Dawn, with their rank noted: Acolyte, Agent, Rite Master, and so on. Higher-ranking members had specific responsibilities. Some handled recruitment and distribution of the commentaries. Others managed the cult's finances. They had wealthy sponsors who donated gold. Others trained members in combat and assassination techniques. The Camorrans, Raven, and Ruma served as Mankar's lieutenants. Raven was the more aggressive of the two, handling military matters and leading attacks. Ruma was scholarly, helping her father with rituals and studying the mysterium xarxes. Both were utterly devoted to their father and his cause. They genuinely believed the world would be better after Dagon's arrival. Eldamil is an interesting case. He was one of Mankar's chief lieutenants, trusted enough to coordinate the emperor's assassination. But when the hero of Kuoch entered paradise, Eldamil had second thoughts. He'd seen what paradise really was, the endless cycle of death and resurrection, the torment of cult members who'd been promised rewards. He helped the hero fight through paradise and confront Mankar, essentially betraying the cause he'd devoted his life to. What made Eldamil change his mind? The obvious answer is witnessing the horror of paradise and realizing Mankar had lied. But there might be more to it. Some scholars think Eldamil was never a true believer, just someone who went along because he'd gotten in too deep. Others think he genuinely believed until seeing the Amulet of Kings fail to protect members in paradise. If Mankar's promise of eternal reward was false, what else was he wrong about? The cult's theology was elaborate beyond just Tamriel belongs to Dagon. They had specific interpretations of creation mythology. They claimed Lorkhan was a Daedric prince who tricked the Aedra into creating Mundus. Then the Aedra betrayed him and stole his realm. The mortal races were fragments of Lorkhan's divine spark, trapped in flesh. The Aedra maintained this prison through the dragon fires and the covenant with Alessia. When Dagon conquers Tamriel, he's actually liberating it, restoring it to its rightful owner, and freeing mortals from the tyranny of the Aedra. This reframes the entire conflict. From the Mythic Dawn's perspective, they're not villains trying to destroy the world. They're heroes fighting against ancient injustice. The Empire and the Blades are the real villains, serving false gods who stole creation itself. Every gate they open, every imperial they kill, is a blow against tyranny. Now obviously this is twisted logic, but it explains why intelligent people joined. Mankar wasn't just saying, "Help me destroy everything." He was offering a coherent, alternate interpretation of history and theology, one that made mortals victims deserving liberation rather than ants to be crushed. The 400 years between when Mankar wrote the commentaries and the Oblivion crisis raise questions. What was he doing all that time? The cult must have existed in some form throughout those centuries. Were there earlier attempts at assassination that failed? Did Mankar try other methods first before settling on killing the entire Septim line? Some scholars think the cult was tiny for most of those 4 centuries, maybe just Mankar and a handful of followers. The massive growth happened in the decades right before the crisis, when Mankar ramped up recruitment. Others think the cult was always substantial, but operated in deep cover, building resources and waiting for the perfect moment. The mysterium xarxes itself is weird. It's described as bound in Daedric leather, written in a strange script that shifts and changes. Only Mankar could read it directly without magical protection. The book had to be destroyed after the crisis because it was too dangerous to keep around. But what exactly was in it? Beyond the rituals for creating paradise and opening oblivion gates, what knowledge did it contain? Some say the mysterium xarxes revealed the secret name of Mehrunes Dagon, granting power over the prince to anyone who knew it. Others say it contained blueprints for remaking reality itself. Still others think it was a living thing, an extension of Dagon's consciousness that corrupted readers. The fact that Mankar changed himself fundamentally, possibly transmutating from Altmer to Dragonborn, suggests the book contained transformation magic beyond normal capabilities. Paradise, or Gaiar Alata, deserves more attention. This was Mankar's personal realm of oblivion, created using the mysterium xarxes. It appeared as a beautiful paradise island with lush forests, gardens, and a massive palace called Karak Agayalor. The palace had fountains, ornate halls, and quarters for Mankar's family. At the top was Mankar's throne room, where he would sit and watch his paradise, but the reality was horror. Cult members who died were sent to paradise, as promised, but they arrived to find themselves immediately attacked by Daedra. They'd fight, die, wake up, and be attacked again, forever. Some cultists didn't even realize they were dead. They thought they were still serving the cause in life. The Forbidden Grotto was the cruelest part. Cultists were told this was the secret reward for the most faithful. Those who received the bands of the Chosen could enter the grotto and achieve transcendence. In reality, the grotto was a torture chamber. The bands couldn't be removed by normal means, so entering meant being trapped in a realm specifically designed to cause suffering. Why would Mankar create this? Several theories exist. Maybe he genuinely didn't know what he was creating. The Mysterium xarxes corrupted his perception, so he saw his realm as paradise when it was actually hell. Maybe he knew and didn't care. Cult members were tools, and their suffering after death meant nothing. Maybe the suffering was intentional. Dagon is the prince of destruction, and perpetual cycles of death feed him power. Or maybe, and this is the darkest theory, Mankar thought he was giving his followers exactly what they deserved. They chose to follow a Daedric prince of destruction. They killed innocents in his name. Why should they get a pleasant afterlife? The eternal combat in paradise is just the logical conclusion of the violent path they chose. The worm cult's activities across different eras reveal patterns. In the second era, during the Planameld, they were working openly in Cyrodiil as the Fellowship of Anchorites. They occupied the Arcane University after the Mages Guild was expelled. They conducted public rituals, recruited openly from the nobility, and even taught necromancy as a legitimate magical discipline. This was their high point of power and influence. But even then, they operated secretly elsewhere. In Morrowind, Skyrim, and other provinces, the cult still worked underground. They established worm nests in caves and ruins, marked with their pentagram symbols. These cells would kidnap travelers, desecrate burial grounds, and conduct experiments far from imperial oversight. The cult's relationship with soul gems is complicated. Vanus Gallerion blamed Manimarco for popularizing soul trapping as a practice. Before the worm cult, soul gems were rare and soul trapping was known only to the most advanced mages. Manimarco made it widespread, teaching the technique to his followers, who then spread it further. The Mages Guild adopted soul trapping because it was useful, but its origins lie in necromantic practices. Black soul gems are specifically a worm cult innovation. After Manimarco achieved godhood and became the necromancer's moon, there were nights when the revenant crossed the sky. During these nights, regular soul gems could be transformed into black soul gems capable of capturing humanoid souls. This shouldn't be possible. Archive's protections prevent human souls from being trapped, but Manimarco's divine power overrides those protections. The worm cult has specific recruitment tactics. They target mages who feel underappreciated by legitimate institutions. Someone denied entry to the Mages Guild or expelled for rule violations is a prime recruit. They offer what the guild won't: no moral restrictions, no ethical guidelines, just pure pursuit of magical knowledge and power. They also recruit from desperate people. Someone dying from disease might be offered lichdom, a transformation into undeath that preserves their mind while granting immortality. The process is horrible and the results are often worse than death, but to someone facing their end, it sounds tempting. The cult has probably created hundreds of liches across the centuries. Outcast witches are another recruitment pool. In many parts of Tamriel, hedge wizards and witches practice magic outside guild oversight. They're often persecuted by local authorities or mainstream magical institutions. The worm cult welcomes them, offering community and protection in exchange for service. Many witches join without even fully understanding what they're getting into until it's too late. The Reachman connection is significant. The Reach has its own magical traditions, separate from either the Mages Guild or the Worm Cult, but Manimarco specifically recruited Reach witches and hagravens, incorporating their practices into his cult. This created hybrid techniques combining necromancy with Reach magic, making the cult more versatile and dangerous. Individual worm anchorites have their own horror stories. There's records of one in Valenwood who raised an entire village's worth of dead to attack a rival town. Another in Skyrim created a breeding program for zombies, trying to produce self-replicating undead that could spread like an infection. A third in Hammerfell bound an entire Redguard hero's spirit to his corpse and forced it to commit atrocities against its own people. The cult's alliance with Molag Bal during the Planameld raises questions about Manimarco's relationship with Daedric princes. He's allied with Molag Bal in the Second Era, but Molag Bal and Mehrunes Dagon are known rivals. Yet in Oblivion, there are implications Manimarco might have worked with Dagon or his cultists. Does Manimarco play princes against each other? Is he loyal to any of them, or does he just use them as stepping stones to his own goals? The creation of ancestor silk is worth noting. This Nibonese practice involves harvesting souls from the dead and weaving them into fabric. The fabric has magical properties and is highly valued. Most Imperials don't consider this necromancy because it's presented as honoring the dead rather than enslaving them, but functionally you're extracting souls and trapping them in material form. The Worm Cult has definitely studied this technique, though they put it to darker purposes. The Slodes of Thras supposedly had contact with the Worm Cult. Slodes are necromancers by nature. It's a standard part of their culture. They view death as a resource to be exploited. If the Worm Cult opened negotiations with the Slodes, that could have led to terrible collaboration. Slode necromancy combined with Manimarco's techniques could create horrors beyond imagination. Fortunately, there's no evidence this partnership actually happened, just rumors and fears. The great battle between Vanus Gallerion and Manimarco in the Second Era was absolutely devastating. Vanus brought an army of mages and lamp knights, a military order dedicated to fighting undead. Manimarco had his cult and legions of undead creatures. They met somewhere in Tamriel, sources vary on the exact location, and fought an epic magical battle. Both sides suffered enormous casualties. The magical energies released were so intense they scarred the landscape permanently. Vanus supposedly killed Manimarco in personal combat, destroying his mortal body. Vanus himself died from his injuries soon after. The remaining mages from both sides limped away, their organizations shattered. Except Manimarco didn't stay dead. His spirit lingered, bound to the world by his necromantic power and will. He slowly reconstituted himself, a process that took decades, or possibly centuries. By the Third Era, he was active again, though perhaps less powerful than before. The cycle of death and return became a recurring theme. Manimarco seemingly can't be permanently destroyed. The cult's doctrine includes interesting philosophy. They view death as an unnatural state imposed by the Aedra to weaken mortals. Before mortality existed, beings were eternal. The Aedra sacrificed themselves to create Mundus, and in doing so, invented death as a punishment. Necromancy, in this view, is reclaiming what was stolen, the power over life and death that should never have been lost. This makes necromancers see themselves as liberators rather than villains. They're fighting against the tyranny of mortality itself. Every zombie raised, every spirit bound, every soul trapped is a small victory against the cosmic injustice of death. Obviously, this is twisted reasoning, but it shows how the cult justifies its actions. The relationship with vampires is interesting. Vampires are undead, created through Molag Bal's corruption. You'd think the worm cult and vampires would be natural allies. Sometimes their vampire necromancers exist and often join the cult, but other times vampires and necromancers are rivals, competing over resources like corpses and souls. Vampires also tend to be arrogant, viewing themselves as superior to mortal necromancers, which causes friction. The cult's collapse after Oblivion is significant because it's happened multiple times. Every time you think the worm cult is finished, after the Great Battle, after the Oblivion Crisis, after various purges, it comes back. This persistence suggests the cult is more an ideology than an organization. Manimarkov founded it, but even if he's truly dead, the concept of a necromancy cult will attract new practitioners who will reform it under the same name. The Sixth House's history before its fall is worth exploring. House Dagoth was one of the original 6 great houses of the Khmer, alongside Indoril, Redoran, Hlalu, Telvanni, and Dres. Each house had distinct culture and specializations. Dagoth's specialty was apparently connection to the dwemer, which is unique. The other houses were often hostile to dwemer. This relationship meant House Dagoth members could travel freely in dwemer territories and even live in dwemer cities. Archaeological evidence shows Khmer and dwemer living together in certain settlements, with House Dagoth clan markings present alongside dwemer ones. This was extremely rare. The two races were usually separate or actively hostile. Why did the dwemer trust House Dagoth? Maybe it was Vorin's personal relationship with Dumak Dwarf King, analogous to Nerevar's friendship with Dumak. Maybe House Dagoth had knowledge or resources the dwemer wanted. Or maybe House Dagoth served as intermediaries during the brief period of cooperation that led to the combined Khmer-Dwemer kingdom of Resdain. Whatever the reason, this connection put House Dagoth in a unique position. When Kagrenak discovered the heart of Lorkhan and began the project to tap its power, Vorin likely knew about it early. He brought word to Nerevar, which sparked the war. So, House Dagoth's special position ultimately led to their destruction. If they hadn't been close to the Dwemer, they might not have learned the secret, and the whole disaster might have been avoided. The Battle of Red Mountain is where things get complicated. The official tribunal version says the Khmer and Dwemer armies clashed at Red Mountain. During the fighting, the Dwemer mysteriously vanished, all of them, everywhere, instantly. The Khmer won, but at terrible cost. Nerevar went into the mountain with his advisors and Vorin, who was guarding Kagrenak's tools. Vorin had gone mad with power and refused to give up the tools, attacking Nerevar. Nerevar defeated him but was poisoned and died from his wounds. The Ashlander version tells it differently. After the battle, Nerevar went into the mountain with Vorin and the tribunal, Almalexia, Sotasil, and Vivek. Vorin had the tools and told Nerevar he'd guarded them faithfully. But the tribunal wanted the tools' power. They murdered Nerevar and attacked Vorin. Vorin fought back but was overwhelmed. The tribunal then used the tools on the heart, achieving godhood, and blamed everything on Vorin. Which version is true? We'll probably never know for certain. But there are clues. Vivek's writings contain strange passages that some interpret as confessions. There's code hidden in the sermons that, when deciphered, suggests Vivek murdered Nerevar. The tribunal's desperate attempts to suppress the nerevarine prophecies suggest they feared the truth coming out. And Dagoth-Ur himself, when you talk to him, speaks of betrayal and stolen godhood. But here's where it gets weird. What if both versions are partly true? Maybe Vorin did succumb to temptation and use the tools, but only after the tribunal attacked him. Maybe everyone involved is guilty of something. The tribunal killed Nerevar and betrayed their oaths. Vorin used the forbidden tools and became corrupted. Nerevar failed to prevent the disaster. The whole tragedy was a cascade of bad decisions and betrayals on all sides. After the battle, House Dagoth was systematically destroyed. Every member was hunted down. Their strongholds were razed. Records were erased. It was a thorough purge, meant to eliminate House Dagoth from history entirely. Survivors were forced to join other houses and abandon their names. The name Dagoth became forbidden, but Vorin didn't die. Deep in Red Mountain, near the heart, his connection to that divine artifact sustained him. He transformed from a chimera into something else, Dagoth-ur, the devil of Red Mountain. His kinsmen who were with him also survived, transformed into ash vampires through their proximity to the heart. They became beings of immense power, but twisted and inhuman. For centuries, Dagoth-ur slept or was trapped, rebuilding his strength. The tribunal would make annual pilgrimages to the heart chamber to draw power from the heart, maintaining their own godhood. Dagoth-ur couldn't stop them because he wasn't strong enough yet. He was playing the long game, waiting until he was ready to strike. When he awoke in 2E882, everything changed. He'd been asleep for over 3,000 years, but he hadn't forgotten. He remembered Nerevar, remembered the betrayal, and now had the power to do something about it. His first action was rebuilding House Dagoth as a cult under his direct control. The recruitment through dreams is one of the creepiest aspects. Dagoth-ur could project his consciousness across Morrowind, entering the dreams of sleeping Dunmer. People with ancestral connections to House Dagoth were particularly vulnerable. Their bloodlines made them receptive to his influence. He'd speak to them in dreams, showing visions of glory under his rule, promising power and purpose. These dreamers would wake with no memory of the dreams, but they'd be changed. They'd feel compelled to go certain places, do certain things. They'd find themselves walking to secret shrines at night, performing rituals, then waking up in their beds with no idea how they got there. Their behavior would change. They'd become more aggressive, more paranoid, more devoted to anti-imperial rhetoric. As the condition progressed, the dreamers would start having the dreams while awake. They'd hear Dagoth-ur's voice in their head, speaking his commands. Eventually, they'd go into full trance states, becoming extensions of his will. In this state, they'd speak with his voice, attack his enemies, and serve his plans perfectly. They were living puppets, controlled remotely by a god. The corpus disease added another layer of horror. It spread through the ash storms blowing from Red Mountain, carried on the wind to settlements across Vardenfell. Initial symptoms included fever, lesions, and confusion. Then the transformations began. Most victims lost their minds completely, mutating into mindless monsters that attacked anyone nearby. But some victims changed differently. If Dagoth-ur deemed them worthy, they'd retain their minds while their bodies warped. They became ascended sleepers, powerful beings with melted faces, exposed organs, and tentacle-like appendages. Or they became ash creatures with trunk-like snouts and gray skin. These beings served Dagoth-ur willingly, grateful for their ascension despite being horrifically mutated. Corpus was interesting because it made victims immortal. They couldn't age or die of natural causes. They could be killed, but they just regenerate eventually. This was a corruption of the divine immortality the tribunal enjoyed. Dagoth-ur was offering his own twisted version to his followers. The disease was called divine disease by some believers who saw it as a gift rather than a curse. The Sixth House bases across Vardenfell tell stories of the cult's activities. Kogorun was the ancestral seat of House Dagoth, recaptured by Dagoth-Uthal in 3E400. It became the main fortress of the resurgent house, housing labs for creating ash creatures and armories for equipping cultists. The stronghold had elaborate bell towers, suggesting the musical component of their rituals. Odrosal was another stronghold filled with ash creatures and cult items. Corpus creatures wandered its halls, and shrines to Dagoth-ur dotted every chamber. Ash statues depicted him in various poses, and cultists left offerings of soul gems and magical artifacts. The place had an oppressive atmosphere. Even non-dreamers felt watched and heard whispers. Smugglers' caves across Vardenfell were infiltrated by Sixth House agents. Places like Omarin had small cult cells disguised as smuggling operations. This let them move resources secretly, using existing criminal networks to avoid temple scrutiny. It was smart. Authorities focused on stopping skooma and dwemer artifacts, not noticing when cult members used the same routes. The cult's political strategy was sophisticated for a group of monster-worshipping disease spreaders. They specifically targeted imperial citizens for assassination, creating tension between the empire and local dwemer. They killed high-profile targets whose deaths would cause maximum disruption. They spread propaganda about throwing off foreign oppression. They recruited from the disaffected and poor, promising them power in the new order. Simultaneously, they infiltrated the great houses. Orvasdren, the leader of the Kamonatong criminal organization and brother to a Hlalu counselor, was secretly a sixth house member. Through him, the cult had influence in House Hlalu's internal politics. They probably had agents in other houses too, waiting to emerge when akulakhan was complete. The ghost fence represents the tribunal's desperation. They couldn't defeat Dagoth directly. He was too strong, backed by the heart's power. They couldn't stop the blight from spreading naturally, so they erected a massive magical barrier around Red Mountain, powered by their own divine energy. This contained most of the ash storms and prevented Sixth House forces from freely leaving the mountain. But the ghost fence required constant maintenance. It drained the tribunal's power significantly. Every year, they grew weaker, while Dagoth grew stronger. The fence was a stopgap measure, buying time they desperately needed but couldn't effectively use. By 3E427, the situation had reached a critical point. Akulakhan, the second Numidium, was Dagoth masterwork. The original Numidium was a dwemer construct designed to be a god-killing weapon, powered by the heart of Lorkhan. The dwemer vanished while activating it, and the Numidium was given to Tiber Septim by the tribunal as part of the armistice. Septim used it to complete his conquest of Tamriel. Dagoth was building his own version. It would be powered by the heart, like the original, but would serve him alone. Once complete, Akulakhan would emerge from Red Mountain and begin reshaping the world. First, it would drive the empire from Morrowind. Then it would conquer the rest of Tamriel, spreading Dagoth vision across the continent. Everyone would be elevated, like his cultists, transformed into beings of his new order. The Ash Vampires deserve individual mention. Dagoth Uthol, Dagoth Gilvoth, Dagoth Vemin, Dagoth Turenul, Dagoth Odros, and Dagoth Arines were Vorin's kinsmen, his brothers or close relatives. Like him, they'd been at Red Mountain during the battle and were sustained by the heart. Each ruled a stronghold and commanded legions of ash creatures. They were incredibly powerful, capable of devastating magic and nearly immortal. Killing the ash vampires was supposed to weaken Dagoth draining his power base. The nerevarine had to hunt them down one by one, fighting through each stronghold to reach them. Each battle was incredibly difficult. These weren't regular cultists, but semi-divine beings with millennia of experience. Their deaths did weaken Dagoth somewhat, though not as much as hoped. The final confrontation in the Heart Chamber is memorable. Dagoth doesn't ambush you or fight dirty. He shows honor, letting you strike first. He talks openly about his goals and motivations. He offers you the chance to join him, genuinely hoping Nerevar will remember their friendship. Only when you refuse does he fight to kill you, and even after you beat him in combat, he doesn't die. He regenerates, powered by the heart. You have to descend deeper into the chamber, fight through the levels to reach the heart itself, and use Kagrenek's tools to sever it from the mortal plane. The process destroys your enchantments and does massive damage, but it works. The heart vanishes, Dagoth screams and dissolves, and 3,000 years of tragedy finally end. Except we still don't know what happened to the heart. It vanished from the mortal plane, but where did it go? Back to oblivion? To Aetherius? Did it rejoin Lorkhan's spirit? Is it still out there somewhere, waiting to be found again? And what happened to the power it represented? Did destroying its enchantments really destroy the power, or did something else inherit it? Let's talk about connections between different band cults, because there's definitely overlap. The Mythic Dawn and Waking Flame both serve Mehrunes Dagon, but did they know about each other? The Waking Flame operated 800 years before the Mythic Dawn. Did Mankar Camoran discover records of the earlier cult? Did Dagon tell him about them? There is circumstantial evidence suggesting yes. Both cults use similar hierarchical structures: high priests, ritual leaders, regular members. Both focused on the four ambitions and transformation through Daedric power. Both believed Tamriel rightfully belonged to Dagon. The similarities are too close to be coincidence. Maybe Dagon has a playbook he uses. Create a cult among the wealthy and powerful. Have them infiltrate society at high levels. Use them to destabilize the empire. Attempt invasion when the barriers are weak. When it fails, wait a few centuries and try again with a new generation. It's a strategy that almost worked twice, so why wouldn't he keep using it? The Dark Brotherhood and Mythic Dawn had contact. In Morrowind, the Dark Brotherhood was allied with Dagonite cultists, providing them sanctuary and working together. This was unusual. The Brotherhood typically stays politically neutral. But someone paid them to help Dagon worshippers, and they accepted the contract. This shows how Daedric cults can co-opt other organizations. The Worm cult and Molagbal's cultists definitely work together, as we saw during the Plenimeld, but there's also overlap between different necromancy-focused groups. Some Worm cult members also worship Molagbal directly. Some serve both Manimarco and Molagbal, seeing no contradiction since both deal with undeath and soul manipulation. The Sixth House and Tribunal have an interesting dynamic. The Tribunal are technically false gods who achieved power through stolen means, according to most versions of events. Dagoth Ur is a false god who achieved power through the same means. Both drew from the heart of Lorkhan, both violated taboos to gain divine power, both built cults around themselves. The main difference is the Tribunal were accepted by society, while Dagoth Ur was condemned. This raises uncomfortable questions. What's the real difference between the Tribunal and Dagoth Ur? Why is one revered and the other banned? The obvious answer is the Tribunal served Morrowind's interests, while Dagoth Ur wanted to destroy the existing order. But both manipulated people through divine power, both demanded worship, and both ultimately failed when their power source was destroyed. The nerevarine cult and Sixth House had indirect connection through prophecy. The nerevarine prophecies predicted both the return of Nerevar and the downfall of the Tribunal and Dagoth Ur. The Sixth House was working toward destroying the Tribunal, which aligned with part of the prophecy. But they opposed the Nerevarine because he'd also destroyed them. So two banned groups, both opposed to the Tribunal, ended up enemies. Talos worship connects to several other cults through politics. The Thalmor banned Talos worship to weaken the Empire. A weakened empire is more vulnerable to Daedric cults like the Mythic Dawn. Did the Thalmor inadvertently help Daedric forces? There's no evidence they did it intentionally, but banning the primary religion destabilizes society, which benefits chaos-focused entities like Mehrunes, Dagon. Necromancy bans affected multiple groups. The Worm cult was the main target, but other practitioners suffered too. This created resentment among legitimate magical researchers who felt unfairly lumped in with evil cultists. Some of these researchers might have joined the Worm cult out of spite, making the ban counterproductive. It's a cycle. Ban necromancy, push practitioners underground, they join actual cults, which justifies the ban. The pattern across all these cults is similar. Charismatic leader, alternate interpretation of theology or history, promises of power or salvation, gradual radicalization of members, and eventual violent action that provokes crackdown. This pattern repeats because it works. People want meaning, purpose, and power. Cults offer all three. Banning them doesn't address the underlying needs that make cults attractive. What can we learn from Tamriel's banned cults? First, suppression doesn't eliminate ideas. You can destroy every member of a cult, but if the ideas remain attractive, someone will eventually restart it. The mythic dawn was wiped out, but someone tried reviving it centuries later. The worm cult has been destroyed multiple times, but keeps coming back. Second, cults emerge from real grievances. The nerevarine cult grew from legitimate concerns about the tribunal's lies. The sixth house tapped into resentment about imperial occupation. The Stormcloak framing of Talos worship ban exploited real religious persecution. Addressing these underlying issues might prevent cult formation better than bans. Third, powerful entities like Daedric princes have patience mortals lack. Mehrunes Dagon can wait centuries between attempts. A failed invasion just means try again later. For immortal beings, all mortal institutions are temporary. They can outlast any government, any law, any opposition. This makes them uniquely dangerous. Fourth, the line between legitimate religion and dangerous cult is fuzzy. The imperial cult worships the divines and includes Talos, a mortal who achieved godhood. The mythic dawn worships Mehrunes Dagon, a Daedric prince, and believes Tamriel is his realm. One is official religion, one is banned cult, but both involve worshipping powerful entities and following their commands. The difference is social acceptance, not inherent morality. Fifth, persecution creates martyrs. Banning Talos worship made it more popular in Skyrim, not less. Outlawing the nerevarine cult made Ashlanders more devoted to their prophecies. Making the Dark Brotherhood illegal gave them a romantic outlaw mystique. Sometimes the ban accomplishes the opposite of its intent. Sixth, infiltration is more dangerous than open operation. The Mythic Dawn and Waking Flame were most effective when they operated as respectable organizations, recruiting from the nobility and hiding in plain sight. The Sixth House's dreamers lived normal lives until activated. Banning groups pushes them underground, where they're harder to monitor and stop. Seventh, apocalyptic cults are particularly dangerous because they have nothing to lose. The Mythic Dawn wanted to end the world as it existed. Being banned and hunted doesn't deter them because they're already committed to destruction. Normal incentives don't work on people who've accepted that everyone, themselves included, might die for the cause. Eighth, some banned groups turn out to be right about major things. The nerevarine cult was correct. The dissident priests who supported them were vindicated. This means you can't dismiss all banned groups as wrong just because they're banned. Some might have legitimate grievances or even be correct about facts mainstream institutions deny. Ninth, cult leaders often believe their own propaganda. Mankar Camoran genuinely thought he was liberating people. Sister Seldina believed Dagon represented positive change. Greywind Blenwith thought Sithis wanted vampire assassins. This sincere belief makes them more dangerous because they can't be bought off or reasoned with. They're not cynical manipulators, but true believers. 10th, the most persistent cults address fundamental human needs. The Dark Brotherhood offers family and purpose. The Worm Cult offers mastery over death. The Sixth House offers unity with the God. These aren't frivolous desires. As long as people feel powerless, purposeless, or mortal, groups promising solutions will attract followers. Anyway, that's the deep dive into the banned cults of the Elder Scrolls. We've covered the major ones: Mythic Dawn, Worm Cult, Sixth House, Nerevarine Cult, Dark Brotherhood, Waking Flame, and others. We've looked at their histories, beliefs, practices, and the theories surrounding them. These are the organizations that scared Tamriel enough to outlaw them, yet they persist across eras and provinces. Their stories show the complex relationship between power, religion, politics, and individual choice in a world where gods are real and magic works. The Elder Scrolls universe is richer for these dark corners. They provide conflict, mystery, and moral complexity. They force players to consider uncomfortable questions about faith, authority, and whether the ends justify the means. And they remind us that in a world of cosmic forces and divine beings, mortal institutions are fragile things that can be toppled by sufficiently determined groups. Thanks for sticking through this deep dive. If you want more Elder Scrolls lore deep dives, let me know. There's always more weird stuff to uncover in Tamriel's history.